Welcome to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. If this is your first time tuning into the show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, are you ready to embrace the time off between minicamp and training camp? Because we've got a few weeks now, and I'm telling you, you and I have had this conversation plenty of times. Football needs to get back in a serious way. And all eyes now as everything, we're going to be transitioning to El Segundo for the new opening of the facility at the Bolt. Training camp will commence in approximately 6 weeks for the Chargers, depending on how you want to look at it. But damn it, Dan, we're going to keep trucking along with some football content and continuing our storylines in the offseason. Biggest ones to watch for. We have talked about guys that are on the roster bubble previously. Dan and I are going to transition this into a different direction. We're going to talk about potential breakout candidates for a number of different players on the Chargers roster, some which may be completely obvious, some may be intriguing as far as going into their first season, but a lot of different options that we're going to go through here and discuss. Obviously, if we do miss any, put your breakout candidate list into the chat. Feel free to do so. This is why we love talking football. But Dan Wolkenstein, before we get started, how are you, sir?
Everything is great on this end. Wonderful weekend. It was absolutely gorgeous in Southern California. For those who are not in Southern California, come hang out for a bit. I went to the Del Mar Fair this weekend, got a gnarly tan / quasi sunburn, which was fantastic. Did well
deserved
not
for
eat
Father's Day.
Oh, thank you. Father's Day with a sunburn. Love it. But no, otherwise it was a great weekend. Happy to be back doing this. Fun episode today. Honestly, I think that's one of the things that's exciting about this Chargers team, Jake, is there are so many players that because of how much trust we all collectively have or hope to see from this coaching staff, you're hoping for breakout seasons by a lot of people. But what we're going to try to do is be realistic about some of the ones that should have breakout seasons, all things considered. Maybe a couple bold predictions, but we'll get there. But before we do that, Jake, my weekend was tremendous. How was your weekend? Low key? Easy? Crazy?
It was good. I celebrated Father's Day with my dad on Saturday instead of Sunday. We went out to Topgolf in Ontario, had a blast doing that early in the morning.
Percentage of shots that you hit straight. I'm going to go over under. Folks in the chat, before I say this, let me know what you think the over under is. I'm going to go over under 37%. That went straight. Pause for 3 seconds. Let people comment. Over under 37. And then pound the under.
I was doing the Jeopardy theme in my head to give him enough time. Now, see, Dan will skew this in terms of the percentage because he has actually golfed with me one time.
That's all I needed.
And truth be told, it was my wedding weekend and I was inebriated. So what can I say? So, of course, that day I definitely did not shoot well. But his percentage is pretty accurate. He's talking about shots that I hit straight. It was definitely under the 36th percentile mark. I have a wicked slice that I just cannot get rid of in my golf swing. So yeah, in terms of straight, putting it where I needed it to be, it was few and far between as far as those shots goes. But
let's just put it this way. Jake is aiming for the trees. It slices back into the fairway.
Pretty much. My dad was even telling me like, hey, angle yourself to like shoot to the left as if you're going to drive it straight to the left because it's going to end up to the right.
Yep.
So that's just how
work
it
with
went.
what you got.
Yes. Try to adapt.
Oh, man. All right. Well, hey, before we do that, let's pay the bills. Let's talk about our friends over at Bet Online.
I want to remind everybody that Bet Online remains your number one source for all your summer sports this season. Baseball, golf, NBA, and NHL playoff stats. All the latest stats, news, and scores available for you to follow for all of your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport that is out there. Head on over to the website, betonline.ag today, or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Bet Online, use the promo code UNLEASHED. Tell them that Chargers Unleashed sent you. Bet Online, where the game starts.
So let's kick this thing off, Jake, with what I believe is probably the position, which before we get to the players, the position group that I think has the biggest potential to have the biggest improvement year over year. And you think about who's manning the ship on defense now with Jesse Minter. You think about the position coach now with Navarro Bowman. You think about the people that are now brought in Denzel Perryman is helping with this. But the names that Jake and I have here to start this thing off are two. Daiyan Henley and Junior Colson for very different reasons. But seeing these two, just looking at them and looking at their potential and the athleticism that they both have and the smarts that they both have, especially Junior Colson with this new defense, I can't think of a position group that has more upside year over year than the linebacking core. These two specifically, we'll see how long if these two can become the starters. But if we're talking breakout candidates, Daiyan Henley has everything physically and mentally to do so. You see his athletic traits sideline to sideline, his ball hawking skills, athleticism for days. And Junior Colson, this is waking up straight off the pillow, right out of the field, ready to rock. These two in this defense, this tandem is so tantalizing. And so breakout candidates for both. I know this is kind of tough because is it realistic to see two linebackers break out at the same time? Maybe in this one. In this defense, maybe. And for different reasons. One's a rookie, one's a second-year player, but let's just face it, Daiyan Henley's essentially a rookie. He got no playing time last year, and everyone was wondering why. I believe he was nursing a hamstring injury, which kind of kept him out a bit. Breakout candidates starting off with two linebackers, Jake.
This is so intriguing, Dan, because both of these players in Junior Colson and Daiyan Henley, even consecutively, you could say that when you looked at Daiyan Henley when he was selected in the third round 2 years ago, that was really the first third round pick that Tom Telesco did since Keenan Allen that you actually felt really, really good about. And then you follow that up with new organization and Joe Hortiz and Jim Harbaugh, obviously electing a very familiar face in Junior Colson and bringing him in. And you add on top of that you now bring in Navarro Bowman to coach this group, not only somebody who's had familiarity with Jim Harbaugh, but definitely when he was playing, he knew how to play. So I think you're adding in both an athletic aspect of this and a mental aspect of this, because like you mentioned, Daiyan Henley's athleticism is just ridiculous for what he was doing in college. And now to see him get that opportunity as a full-time starter is definitely intriguing. And from Junior Colson's standpoint, he's a little bit of both, because you know what he can do from an athletic standpoint, but he is coming into this, honestly, and arguably the most prepared out of any defensive player on this roster right now, considering that he's lived the Jesse Minter defense for so many years now. He knows the terminology. He already has a leg up on everybody else as it relates to the scheme that needs to be run. Without putting specific numbers on this, I think when you compare it to the linebacking tandem that you had last year with Eric Kendricks and Kenneth Murray, I think there's so much more potential there, obviously, that you would expect to get a rise out of it. I think you kind of have to take it back to the measure of the days of Kaiser White, Drew Tranquil, in terms of what you had at a linebacker tandem then. Because Drew Tranquil, obviously, mentally, he knew the game. Kaiser White, ridiculous athleticism that he was able to bring to the table. And there was a good coach that was able to really develop their skill sets during the time that they were with the Chargers. So in terms of numbers-wise goes, yes, it is kind of hard to project this, considering that Junior Colson's a rookie and Daiyan Henley, as Dan mentioned, it's kind of had a red shirt first year, and this will be the first opportunity that he's really had. But this all of a sudden has just turned into such an athletic starting tandem at the linebacker spot. You would just expect good things out of this group right now.
Yeah, and again, we talk about last year. I mean, we said we have a rookie and a second-year player, but the second-year player has a grand total of 54 snaps under his belt. So it's essentially two rookies, but both show insane upside. And I mentioned it before, the gap between what was last year to this year, if we're just looking at position groups, linebacker might be the one that has the biggest improvement year over year. And that's because of the players, because of the coaching as well. And also the scheme. I think the scheme matters. And having two players, both with athleticism, with smarts, with the ability to kind of learn on the fly and play positionless, so to speak, at times, having that versatility matters in this defense. And these two linebackers are going to, in our opinions, have a really, really good chance to break out. Next two on our list, Jake, we're going to another position group, and I think people were very nervous about. Very nervous about because of the departure of Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. But, Jake, I'll let you kind of kick this thing off. Josh Palmer and Ladd McConkey, two breakout candidates. And again, very different reasons, and we can define breakout differently. Josh Palmer, Ladd McConkey, Jake, the season's theirs.
Honestly, when you're talking about just the wide receiver group in general, you can have an objective conversation to say that there is potential for any of the wide receivers that the Chargers essentially keep, whether it's Brendan Rice, whether it's Quentin Johnson, you add in Joshua Palmer, Ladd McConkey to this.
DJ Chark.
Yeah, DJ Chark. There's objectively an argument to say which ones could have a breakout season. But we highlighted Joshua Palmer and Ladd McConkey in this respect. Obviously, for Joshua Palmer, now finally getting the opportunity to become wide receiver 1 when he's essentially been wide receiver 3 since he's been in the league and been on this team because he's been behind Keenan Allen and Mike Williams during that time frame. And when Joshua Palmer has been healthy, he's been able to be a very, very good wide receiver when they need him. We don't like talking about that health word as it relates to anybody on this show, but that's the truth. He has been able to step up when needed. And Ladd McConkey, yes, rookie season, yes, hasn't taken an actual NFL snap yet, but the rapport that is already building between he and Justin Herbert, and you heard Justin Herbert's comments last week as it relates to Ladd McConkey in terms of say he's already operating like he's been in this league for 4 or 5 years now. So the connection between Ladd McConkey early on with Justin Herbert and obviously Joshua Palmer being the veteran of this wide receiver group, I think there's definitely potential there. And especially now you look at the intangible of the way that this offense is going to be run, I think there's going to be more opportunities for both of them in that circumstance, considering that the running game is going to help considerably. It may become much more of a short game before Justin Herbert ends up bombing it down the field. And in that circumstance, I think that that's where both of these guys have the opportunity to thrive.
Yeah, I'm looking at Josh Palmer first and foremost. He played in, I believe, 10 games last year. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 games last year, recorded 584 yards. Imagine that in a full season. And that's with Easton Stick throwing for a handful of games last year. Josh Palmer has the tools to be a high-end wide receiver 2, in my opinion. Wide receiver 1, we'll find out. We're going to see here soon. But we've talked about it. Does this team need to have a bona fide wide receiver 1? History says no, but they've got a lot of guys with potential. Breakout candidate, I think what I define for Joshua Palmer as a breakout candidate is a name that nationally, you and I, Jake, we hear a lot of shows nationally or podcasts or folks talking about the wide receiver room, and they're arguably having the worst receiver room in the NFL leading into this NFL draft in the offseason. Nobody mentions Joshua Palmer. Nobody did. It was Keenan Allen, Mike Williams left, and then they say, and then there's nobody there at the receiving corps. No one respects Joshua Palmer. Hardly anybody even knew who he is. I define breakout season for Joshua Palmer as he's going to become a name that is recognized nationally this year. And it might not be because he has more opportunities this year, because I think, yes, he's elevated because Mike Williams and Keenan Allen aren't there, but the number of opportunities might be a little less because it might be throwing a little bit less. But his name, I think, will come up more because in key situations between him and Ladd McConkey, they are going to be depended upon, and they are dependable, in my opinion. Josh Palmer, when he's out there, is good, man. Like, he is so disrespected. And so he will be a household name this year nationally. You'll see him more being discussed by the national pundits. Now, Ladd McConkey, I have breakout season for him as he's going to be the one that I believe in the most crucial situations at 3rd and 7 or less, 3rd and 4 or less, something in that range. That's going to be McConkey all day long. And you're seeing it already in training camp. Breakout candidate. I see him. Breakout candidate for him. What that means, I would say in terms of targets for this team, maybe number 2. I can see him being the second most targeted receiver or hell, playmaker on this team. But when it's all said and done, I wouldn't be that shocked if he was the number one targeted receiver on this team. Now, is that a lot to expect from a wide receiver who has played a lick of football in the NFL? Sure. But what you're seeing him do in training camp and in OTAs and all that stuff so far, or training camp to be determined, but all the OTAs and minicamp, he's lighting it up against anyone. So these two, for different reasons, I think can put their name on the map real quick. And it's fascinating to see what Joshua Palmer looks like next season, what uniform he's wearing, what position he's in, because do the Chargers pay the receiver? Should they pay a receiver who breaks out when they have this receiver staple and this offensive scheme? I don't know. But it's fun to think about a wide receiver core post Mike Williams and Keenan Allen with multiple guys who can have breakout seasons. And before we go further, Jake, I think it is important because we talked about this as kind of like possibly a downfall or a concern that there are so many guys that were brought in on kind of prove it deals, hoping for bounce back seasons. This isn't bounce back candidate. This is breakout candidate. So Derwin James could be a bounce back candidate for sure. We all know who Derwin James is, but it's not going to be a breakout season if he becomes all pro. Like that's who he is in our opinion. He needs to be used correctly. So there are players like that where could they come back to form? Sure. But we're talking about the guys that are going to break out into form. And these two, I think, could do it. This could be their time to shine. Anything else on the receivers before we move forward?
No, again, it's an objective conversation to have. I think that you could just put in there to say, I think everybody would hope that Quentin Johnston would take that next step. Again, the bar isn't set too high given what his rookie season was. And it sounds like everything from Quentin Johnston's acceptance of what happened in his rookie season, the humility that he's coming into camp with, on top of what the coaches are saying about him, they know that they're going to work Quentin Johnston multiple ways to get him the ball, not just strictly get him back to, I guess, what made him so successful when he was at TCU, more specifically against Michigan in that playoff game. So they know what they have to go with. I like the fact that Sanjay Lal talked about, like, look, we're not looking behind us in regards to Quentin's rookie season. We're just going to learn from it, build it back up, and progress forward the way that we know that we can thrive with him. So it's an objective conversation. I would not be surprised for anybody to throw a notion that any one of these wide receivers, because Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are no longer here, could have a potential to have a fantastic year.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, moving on. So two players here that I could see having breakout seasons, and one's for, obviously, as we discussed them, will be for very different reasons. On the left, we got a tight end. On the right, we got a running back. Hayden Hurst, J.K. Dobbins. And Hayden Hurst, some could argue, oh, well, we need breakout season. He's had a good year. I could see him eclipsing that incredible year that he did have with previous regimes and improving upon that. I'm looking at season totals here for Hayden Hurst. He's got 571 in 2020 with Baltimore. He's got 414 in 2022. He's got 349. So 571 is the bar. I can see him easily breaking that. 800. I'd be shocked if he didn't, to be honest. And looking at what he did in training camp, or excuse me, OTAs and minicamp so far, with Justin Herbert as his quarterback, Jake, Hayden Hurst has a chance to shine. And you heard the coaching staff talk about him being one of those guys with the potential to break out. I was there when the coach was talking about this. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Hayden Hurst becomes that tight end one, at least athletically and productivity wise, that this team has been needing. We hope to see it with Gerald Everett. Wasn't utilized enough, in our opinion. Jared Cook was utilized a bit, but that athleticism just is not the same. Hayden Hurst coming off of a pretty serious injury, took time slowly to get back. He has everything that this team would want. So Hayden Hurst, breakout candidate for me. Jake, let's talk about J.K. Dobbins.
For JK, I think this is kind of back into the wide receiver conversation where you could make an argument to say out of this running back stable about a number of players that could have a breakout season, and it's going to be because of how this running game is utilized. Now, for Gus Edwards, obviously he's your power back. He specializes in goal line situations. JK is your explosive running back in terms of what he brings to the game. When he's on and he's healthy. Former second-round pick. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement as it relates to what he could bring to this running back stable. And you add in Kamani Vidal, who had a very, very productive college career, and a lot of intrigue wrapped around that, on top of Isaiah Spiller, who just unfortunately has not, much like Daiyan Henley, has not gotten an opportunity to see the field. So this is going to be another running back by committee situation, which the Chargers haven't really found themselves in a number of different years, because they were always looking for that number 2 behind Austin Eckler, and they just never were able to find it. Now with JK, Dan, we've had Chris Harry on this show, and he fully expects that when it comes to week 1, that if all the health lines up for JK, that he's going to be the starter over Gus Edwards. And we know as it stands right now with what Jim Harbaugh was talking about, that Gus Edwards is nursing something, but he's fully expected to be ready by the time that training camp rolls around. So it'll be an interesting camp battle that ultimately ends up coming through with this. But again, we go back to some familiarity. When JK was playing, this was a familiar system to him in terms of what is being installed now between Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman. So the type of potential that's there, J.K. Dobbins is still very young, explosive running back when he has the ball. He's got that potential when you're talking about in terms of the guys who could lead this rushing attack in yards. The name should go to the top, especially if we're talking health in terms for J.K. Dobbins. So you look at those previous years that he had with Baltimore, his rookie season in particular, that was a great turnout for his rookie season.
800 yards, 9 touchdowns, 6 yards per attempt.
The potential now that you have with Justin Herbert at the quarterback spot and the rest of the running back group that you have in this room, Dan, remember, Greg Roman talked about it. He said, it's not just going to be about how we run the ball. It's the fact that we've got 4 guys essentially here that could give you a different taste every time that we do that. So what's that going to do? It's going to keep guys in that stable fresh. So I really like the intrigue of J.K. Dobbins having just not just the best season that he's ever had. Obviously, that's kind of a short list due to you skew that to the injuries. But in terms of this running back stable and having the most potential to lead it in terms of yards, explosive plays, overall production, I think he's got all the potential in the world to do that. Yeah, and
I went back and forth with JK versus Gus as kind of the breakout candidate. And, it's unfortunate for Gus Edwards. He signs, and then so much running back activity happened after his signing with the draft selection, with J.K. Dobbins being brought in. And, I think it's pretty clear that this team is going to look for kind of the running back by committee. But I look at J.K. Dobbins because it's almost like he's a forgotten player in the NFL because of all of the stuff that he's gone through. This is probably the one player on this list that it is only bearing health. If someone could promise me that he is going to be healthy all season, I would guarantee you he's going to be a breakout candidate. But that's a big asterisk. And I know we've seen it a lot with years past, but he seems to be trending in the right direction. He talked about being healthy, and he's talking about kind of what that could look like and the passes behind him. But until we see it, you can't put all of your faith in that. You have to watch it unfold. But when healthy, if healthy, you can all but guarantee in a Greg Roman offense with the running back room we have, J.K. Dobbins should be able to cook. And that's because, not just because J.K. Dobbins is a scheme, the offensive line should be improved, both roster and scheme. The blocking on the outside from the tight ends with Will Dissly and company should be improved. So all the reason in the world to be bullish on this running back room, all having breakout seasons. You can talk about all of them. But J.K. Dobbins, I think that's the one that I'm rooting for the most, because a season with a breakout J.K. Dobbins would be so fun to watch. And I think that's what's most important to this team and being successful if someone just told, if all anybody told me was, hey, Dan, it's week 19, and you look back and the Chargers run game was top 7. I'm like, book the AFC Championship. Book it. Now, can they? I don't know. Top 7 is going to be hard considering where it's been, but a lot's riding on this running back room being successful. Jake, anything from you on Hayden Hurst? I know I kind of skipped over that when you went to J.K. Dobbins, but thoughts on him?
No, it's okay. I think the argument with Hayden Hurst is interesting because you've been looking for the offensive coordinator that's going to use these tight ends the way that you'd hope for. Now, obviously, this is different from the days of Gerald Everett and Jared Cook when they were in this team. And obviously with Donald Parham, we've always been looking for those tight end sets in a Kellen Moore-led offense. And we thought that we were going to get that last year and the year before that under a different offensive coordinator in Joe Lombardi, and it just never ended up happening. But obviously in this scheme with Greg Roman, it's shifted a little bit more in terms of the priorities and what they want from certain tight ends. So obviously enter Will Dissly into that conversation. I think when you look at the familiarity that Hayden Hurst had in Baltimore's system previously, you mentioned obviously the year in the Falcons that he had his best season of his career. Will Dissly's obviously going to handle plenty of the blocking as it relates to this group. It really shouldn't take much. I mean, if we're looking for the best pass catching threat, if Donald Parham unfortunately had not succumbed to all of his injuries, I think that the buck would stop with him in terms of what would have been proven already. But Hayden Hurst, I think, has a leg up on that just because A, he knows this system. B, he's got Justin Herbert as his quarterback. Again, we're talking about tight ends that are going to be used differently in this regard. Donald Parham still is nursing something. We heard that from Jim Harbaugh as well, leading into training camp, but nothing that we've heard of as far as being significant. But it's all going to be based on how these tight ends are deployed. And you heard Hayden Hurst talk about in one of his first press conferences that he was at the podium for, and he says, he talked about basically living this whole aspect of playing 60 minutes. Getting your body ready for that type of endurance to be taken. And he's already said, he's like, I've lived it. I know what's required of me to do it. It's now about me going out there and outlasting the other guy and playing better than him for 60 minutes. So yeah, it's definitely a potential for him to have a breakout season, given where he's been, previous organizations, overcoming some injuries and previous stat lines in this type of offense, especially if we're talking about the Chargers playing with a lead or being able to build up on opposing defenses. Yeah, I think he's got all the potential to possibly do that. I think he's the standout player for that tight end room to possibly have a breakout year.
I would agree. Let's move on, Jake. We have 2 players here that have been on the team for at least a year. One of which might be a surprise to folks. So I'm going to let you kind of take the lead with one Tuli Tuipulotu, who we have as a breakout candidate. And a lot of people might say, breakout candidate? Jake, let's see you.
Look, I'm not taking anything away. We all know how good Tuli looked in his rookie season. But I say breakout because you still look at the core 3 that you had last year at the edge position in Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Tuli. And the amount of snaps that they played with the 3 of them together just was not what you were hoping for last year due to injuries to Joey Bosa. Now you look at it with Joey Bosa being back fully healthy, seeing the extra motivation from Joey Bosa last week when he was talking about himself and Khalil Mack. Jesse Minter obviously got what he wanted when he first came to this team, and keeping Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Tuli the opportunity to coach them. And you add in Bud Dupree to that edge room. This is the deepest edge room that the Chargers maybe have ever had. Definitely since 2000. That's for sure.
Find me a deeper one.
It's hard to find a roster that had this type of potential. So I think not just from the standpoint of what Tuli can build upon. You've seen Jesse Minter and Jim Harbaugh just lauding over Tuli during mini camps. They're not going away from those packages that was really beneficial to the Chargers defense when they had Thule, Bosa, and Mack on the field at the same time. They've already been employing that during mini camps. So for Thule, just as naturally as he looked, I know it doesn't show it so much as far as the sack stats, but in terms of the pressures and hurries that he was able to do to just be a disruptor, he's going to have even more opportunity in my mind to build off of that and have a better season than what he had in his rookie year.
Yeah. And again, breakout candidate. Let's just look at the numbers. According to ESPN, he's got 4.5 sacks. Like, Chargers fans and folks covering this team know Thule. Nationally, I don't think people know that name. And similar to a Josh Palmer, for different reasons, I think Thule for sure is going to have a bump in the numbers that people see statistically nationally. And the impact on this team is going to be huge. And you heard Thule at the podium kind of talk about how many opportunities he kind of left there out on the field. He knows how much more he can get. Joey Bosa praised him in terms of paying the ultimate respect by saying he doesn't look that different from last year because he was so good in his rookie year. But I think it's going to be the numbers that jump off the page that are going to break out this season compared to next. Asante Samuel Jr., Jake, and this is another one of the guys that you have on this list. I'm interested to hear breakout season, what that is defined as by you for Asante Samuel Jr.
Because you're still looking for that full complement season for Asante Samuel Jr. And this is big for him. He's going into a contract year. And yes, there have been flashes. And the crazy part about this is, Dan, when you look at this in terms of measure it to the rest of the cornerback group that the Chargers have had during the last few years, Asante Samuel Jr. has essentially been your best corner that you've had. But when you measure that in terms of what the secondary has done, that's not the most impressive statement, because Michael Davis has been inconsistent, especially last year, just was not where you needed him to be. Obviously, J.C. Jackson did not end up panning out at all. Jasir Taylor, Dean Leonard, those are two cornerbacks that haven't developed yet. There's been this constant rotation and overhaul over the last couple of years, and now you add in 2 draft picks that you made in Tarheeb Still and Cam Hart, and Asante is now the veteran of this group. And for what Jesse Minter wants in his defense, there are things to Asante's game that you still want to see come to fruition. Last year, he had a great start to training camp. This year, he's had a good start to minicamp. Last year, what happened in training camp didn't fully end up translating to the field, I think for a number of different reasons. One, from his own play, but B, from the overall scheme, because the Chargers just could not get after the quarterback. And in their secondary, they just couldn't decide whether or not they wanted to be in man or cover or zone defense or whatever the hell it was. They really were just throwing everything at the wall, hoping for something to stick. So I think you had an inconsistent scheme that didn't benefit a lot of defensive players, especially the secondary. Now, from what you have in Jesse Minter's scheme, along with Coach Clinkscale talking about he wanting all of his DBs to be versatile, to be playing both positions, I think Asante Samuel Jr. is going to fall right where he needs to be, not just from his own self-motivation and what he knows going into a contract year, but how he's going to benefit in this defensive scheme as well. I think we're going to see the best version that we have seen in the last 4 years for Asante Samuel Jr.
Yeah, he's going to be pushed because of competition in this group, no doubt about it. And again, similar to Truly Tupelotu, I don't think anybody really questions Asante Samuel Jr. in terms of kind of that ball production and the capabilities and the potential that he has with that. But even with that, Jake, career, he has 6 interceptions total over 3 years, 2 interceptions per year. That's not much. And we're all talking about him being a potential CB1. 2 interceptions per year. Last year, in 16 games started, 2 interceptions, 13 passes defended. I mean, if you're going to be a CB1, CB2 in this league, you got to have more production than that, especially with someone who has some of the tackling angle deficiencies that we've seen from Asante Samuel Jr. And so there are certainly things that he needs to clean up. But what I do think that he will benefit from in this defense will be opportunities to showcase that ball production. I think that he has an opportunity to have more splashy plays this year than previous years that won't make or break the game. I think he's been put in better positions. I think the group around him will be better positioned to make some plays. But if we're talking about breakout candidates, it's not that hard to be a breakout candidate when the bar is at 2 interceptions. If he can be a better tackler, if he could have better pursuit angles, and let's say he can get to 5 or 6 interceptions this year, absolutely. And then you go back to, again, similar to Josh Palmer. Do you re-sign him? What's his market going to be? I don't know. Would you? Like, let's say he balls out. Let's say he does, 6 interceptions, improves, ends up being like a bona fide CB2, maybe 2+. Would you re-sign him at what a cornerback in the free agency market would get for a young one like this ascending, if that were to be the case?
The old regime probably would have done that. But what we know from Joe Hortiz, it's not necessarily guaranteed.
And you know why? Because there is a player who is coming up behind him that this may be a bold prediction.
Oh, this is definitely a bold prediction, but I love it.
Tarheeb Still, Jake. I think when it's all said and done, and I've been on record for weeks now clamoring for this Chargers team to bring in a cornerback, a veteran corner, who can kind of help slot folks down to where Kristian Fulton and Asante Samuel Jr. can be that CB2, CB3. Asante Samuel Jr. can then kind of battle it out with a Tarheeb Still for that slot corner position. Cam Hart can kind of battle it out for that CB3, CB4 spot on the outside. But we've started to see glimpses, and Jesse Minter talked about Tarheeb Still kind of taking that next step during the OTAs this past week. We saw him intercepting, had multiple passes defended this past week. We saw what he looked like on film, and it's interesting going back now, everyone's reaction to Tarheeb Still, for the most part, when he was just selected as a possible reach, maybe, or an unknown. But you go back and watch what he's done and the type of player that he is and how that fits a Jesse Minter defense and his versatility. And then you pair that with the improvements and the trajectory he's on during camp. I could see it. I think he's going to be the starting nickel by the time this season starts. If it was me, I think that's who else do you put in the slot? Are you putting Jadir Taylor over him? Honestly, genuinely. Like, has Jadir Taylor showed folks anything that is that bullish to where you believe that he's going to take that next step or can be as what he was last year? Even with that, are you taking that over Tarheeb Still and the potential he has? I don't know.
To me, even though I know Coach Clinkscale talked about, I want everybody to be versatile so that if something happens where someone goes down, that they could step in a pinch. And yes, Asante Samuel Jr. is one of the few that we know that can be versatile enough to play inside or outside. Coach Clinkscale said he wanted the same from Kristian Fulton. But realistically, based on who is on this roster, you put Asante Samuel Jr. and you put Kristian Fulton outside. That should be no question. Jadir Taylor, I think, had the opportunity because of what we saw from him late 2 years ago, which that was really kind of what got people's attention. Then he got the opportunity to be the starter. And unfortunately, took a big step back, and there was constant rotation with him in the slot because they needed better production out of that position. To Dan's point, while this may be a hot take or a shoot your shot type of moment, it's a valid argument. And you look at that just from the standpoint of essentially why they drafted Tarheeb Still, even where they drafted him, and putting him into this system. I say the competition for slot cornerback is wide open. It's wide open. So To me, that the starter for that position right now is a question mark. But as you would possibly think, based off of what we've got so far of Ja'Sir Taylor, and yes, a small sample size that has not even reached training camp yet, in Tarheeb Still, the competition between these two should be vital by the time that we get to the end of training camp.
Yeah, and I'm looking at PFF for Ja'Sir Taylor last year, and his rookie year had 161 total snaps, had a 60.6 defensive grade. 2023, this past season, had over 530 snaps. So he had enough to see what he was. Now, again, that defense scheme was going through it last year, especially in the secondary. So, you take it with a grain of salt, but still 56.2 coverage grade, 56.2 total defensive grade, firmly in the red, tackling 29.9, not great. Coverage grade 58.0, yellow, not good. Are you believing in that over a Tarheeb Still? Like, I'm not saying Tarheeb Still is, light years better than him, but what's the reason to think that he's not going to out-duel Ja'Sir Taylor right now? In my opinion, I hope it turns into Tarheeb Still versus Asante Samuel Jr. for the slot corner position. And maybe it turns into there is going to be a starter they can rotate in. Like, sweet, sign me up for that. But don't sleep on Tarheeb Still making this starting team, man. I think he has all the traits. I think a lot of people, myself included, were very excited about Cam Hart getting selected. And I think the trajectory for Cam Hart is very tantalizing as well. But I don't know if he can start out the gate as strong as Tarheeb Still is. Tarheeb Still seems like he's more pro-ready than Cam Hart. Although Cam Hart has all the size and traits. It's just a matter of getting the reps.
I think it's more just from the standpoint
and
of
opportunity.
Competition. Yes, then that's more of what I put it on, because with Ja'Sir Taylor's season last year, that's the reason we're even having this conversation in the first place. With Asante Samuel Jr. and Kristian Fulton, I think you can say, just based off of Cam Hart's size, that naturally you would probably put him outside. But does he have a leg up as opposed to those other two? No, he probably doesn't beat those two for the starting outside positions by the time that training camp's over with. So you leave that between Ja'Sir Taylor and Tarheeb Still. It's wide open. It's wide open at this point. So, a little too hot for my taste, but I respect Dan for going with it, because you start putting things together and makes sense. And we'll see what happens by the time that we reach September.
So then let's finish it with this, Jake. Of all of the names that we went over today, which one would you put? Are you most confident in having the breakout season? You got to pick one.
It's got to be Junior Colson. It's got to be Junior Colson. There is so much that he has working to his advantage for this defense. And again, you could not just out of the linebackers in general, out of a majority of the players on this defense in terms of what he can be. Yep. Dan staked his claim when he tweeted this shortly after Junior Colson was drafted, that he felt that he had the most potential out of any non-quarterback in the entire draft to come in and have the biggest impact for any team. And you have to connect those dots between Jesse Minter and Jim Harbaugh for what they want to do defensively. And it makes sense. And I think he's going to get every opportunity to do so. And especially for the Chargers, who have really been attacked over the middle of the field for a number of different years. And you pair that with the likes of Daiyan Henley and what he can be physically for a lot from the linebacker position. Both of those guys are going to feed off of one another. But Junior Colson, there was a reason why everybody flocked to that selection. Junior Colson shouldn't have even been on the board when the Chargers were there in the third round. Let's just call it what it is. And there's a reason why everybody is so intrigued by him being added to this team. And that's why.
So you took Junior Colson. I'm going to go Ladd McConkey, since you took that one. I don't want to say the same name. I agree with all your takes, by the way. Smart man. I'm going to go with Ladd because, one, I think he has all the traits that Justin Herbert loves and that this team has been lacking and does lack. And he kind of combines some of the traits that Justin Herbert likes. He has that dependability. He has that slot maker slot machine type feel. He has some of that juice too. He's got the speed. He has that athleticism, the yak stuff, and he has the hands and the dependability that Justin Herbert, I think, will gravitate to. And in isolation, right? I like Junior Colson, and I love the abilities and the possibilities with him and the scheme and all that kind of stuff. But Ladd McConkey has Justin Herbert throwing to him. And I think that's what helps kind of elevate his ability to have a breakout candidate season. And that breakout season, if it's not Junior Colson, I think it has to be one of those two players. Junior Colson, Ladd McConkey.
Interesting that we're talking about two rookies out of everybody that we just talked about on this roster, that those are the two names that come up.
It is interesting. And it's because those are the two positions that Chargers fans all were like, they gotta figure something out here.
Give kudos to the front office. That's what you're supposed to find with your second and your third round picks.
True. So in the comments, if you had to put all of your money, rent, mortgage, car payment, whatever it is, on one player to have a breakout season this year, who would it be? Let us know. But that's exciting times for Chargers fans that they can have so many possibilities, and that's kudos to the front office, the staff, and to the coaches, because that's what folks are expecting with this team, is that coaching bump to elevate this team to be able to produce more than they've done in the past. Jake, that'll do it. I think we're good. Anything else want to tell our great friends before we get out of here?
That's it, man.
That's it. Okay, for Jake Hefner, I'm Dan, Chargers Unleashed, LA Football Network. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. You can find Jake at Jake T. Hefner, myself at Dan W Sports. We'll talk to you next time on Chargers Unleashed.